So welcome everyone to this event, Democratic Backsliding in Bihar and Texas, brought to you by Hindus for Human Rights. I'm Riya Chakraborty, the Senior Policy Director. As many of you may know, HFHR provides a Hindu voice in support of human rights across the world, especially in defense of human rights in South Asia. Our work is rooted in the values of peace, truth, and justice as we fight for a more equitable and just world. Today, we're hosting a unique conversation on how the world's two largest democracies have undermined the rights of their voters. We're focusing specifically on events that have unfolded in the states of Texas, in the US, and Bihar in India. Both are the second largest states in their respective countries, and both states have become the front lines for voter manipulation. So today, we'll discuss what's happening in both states and what this means for democracy in the US, India, and around the world. I'm going to give a very brief overview and then we'll meet our panelists. So for those who aren't familiar, in the state of Texas, lawmakers have been attacking voting rights for a long time now. So my whole adult life has been marked with attacks on voting rights. The most recent wave of attacks started in 2012 after the re-election of President Obama. The US Supreme Court at that time struck down a crucial part of the Voting Rights Act, which opened the way for state legislatures around the world to introduce new voting requirements. At the same time, state legislatures were redrawing congressional maps to favor their parties. Since then, the Texas legislature has repeatedly made it harder for Texans to vote. This year, at the behest of Donald Trump, Governor Greg Abbott called a special session to redraw Texas's congressional maps and secure Trump's political power at the national level. State House Democrats left the state to try to delay the bill. They've now returned, and the bill passed both chambers of the Texas legislature. But in the process, they forced a national conversation on the electoral future of the United States. In India, a similar process is unfolding. Unlike in the US, traditionally, Indians did not bear the burden to prove their citizenship. Instead, the Election Commission would verify citizenship and Indians would confirm their identity. The founders of India understood that for as many Indians as possible to participate in the process, not every Indian would have the ability to prove their citizenship. This was never a perfect process, but in recent years, the Election Commission in India has come under additional scrutiny. In Bihar, the ECI has undertaken a special intensive review of Bihar's voter rolls just months before crucial state elections. Although the ECI conducts regular reviews, this review unusually came just a few months before the elections and with little notifications to voters in Bihar. The ECI announced that it had deleted 6.5 million names from the voter rolls and asked Biharis to prove their citizenship based on a limited number of identification forms. As we'll discuss, this process was problematic and disproportionately affected voters from poor and minority communities. It's also come as opposition parties raise concerns about the politicization of an institution that has historically stayed separate from India's political entities. So today, I'm so glad to introduce two individuals who've been at the front lines of these attacks and who have been personally who've paid a personal price for their efforts to raise questions about the threats to electoral integrity in their respective countries. Mr. Salman Pojani is a representative in the State House of Texas. Representative Pojani was the first South Asian and Muslim state representative elected to the Texas legislature in 2022. Representative Pojani emigrated to Texas as a teenager, worked his way through the business and political world to become a city councilor in the city of Euless and then a state representative. In his time in office, Representative Pojani has been part of an eventful series of debates on the state of democracy in Texas and joined his colleagues in leaving the state last month. Alongside his colleagues, he has faced a personal price for this act and continues to serve his constituents despite threats to his job, citizenship, and safety. We are also joined by Mr. Pawan Khera, who is the chairman of the Media and Publicity Department in the All India Congress Committee and a spokesperson for India's chief opposition party, the Indian National Congress. In 2023, he was forcibly removed from a flight and arrested after he criticized Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Despite facing 12 cases under similar charges, he continues to speak out against the undemocratic practices of the ruling party and its affiliates. After his party raised serious allegations of irregularity against the Election Commission of India last week, the ECI has been personally going after Mr. Khera. But regardless, he has been steadfast in demanding accountability from the ECI. So as you can see, these are two individuals who have put a lot on the line to advocate for stronger democracies in their respective countries. So Mr. Khera has a time limit, so we'll start with him and dig into what's happening in India today. To begin, so your party, Mr. Khera, has raised many allegations and just wrapped up a massive march in Bihar to mobilize Biharis around allegations that the election commission colluded with the BJP to steal Indians' votes. Could you tell us a little bit about the multiple allegations that the Congress Party has raised, and a little bit about the Yatra as well?
Sure. So it all started with the exposés by the Congress Party on the way Maharashtra election, another assembly election, took place in October, November last year, wherein in 5 months we saw a spike, 4 million plus votes added to the electoral roll, which is unimaginable, though we deal with millions and billions in terms of population. But 5 months, 4 million plus new votes getting added to the Maharashtra Assembly is unimaginable. So we challenged that, we questioned that, we exposed that. Using all our charges, the Election Commission came up with a very clever strategy, which is called the SIR in Bihar, the Special Intensive Survey Roll Revision in Bihar. So on the face of it, it is to clean up the voters' lists. But in reality, in practice, it is to legitimize what happened in Maharashtra. Through the legal route, now they are doing exactly the same in Bihar. In Maharashtra, they added votes. In Bihar, through this exercise, they are removing votes. We challenge them. The Aadhaar, which is the identity of every single Indian, was not kept as a document which would qualify you to be on the electoral roll, which was surprising. So, how am I expected to dig out my birth certificate from 30 years, 40 years, especially in a state like Bihar, especially during these rainfall, monsoon months where there is heavy rains and there is annual flooding. Half of Bihar is flooded. People lose their documents, their houses, their fields, everything, their belongings. So this was deliberately done, coinciding with the monsoon months, demanding documents from people who would be more worried about protecting their lives and little belongings because of the floods. You can't expect them to do this. Yet, Bihar is also a state which sees massive migration out of the state in search of employment in the urban centers of the rest of the country. Expecting those migrant workers to come back, fill out these forms, look for their identities, especially the birth certificate, submit everything to the election commission, and then get their names added, that too is not assured. So therefore, we went to the court, we went to the streets of Bihar. This was a 15-day yatra with Mr. Rahul Gandhi led along with the alliance partners, Mr. Tejasvi Yadav and others. What we saw on the streets of Bihar was that people were genuinely concerned. Some of them were declared dead by the election commission and they were walking in the yatra with us. You must have seen some of them also had a cup of tea with Mr. Gandhi in Delhi. They specially came to Delhi, had a cup of tea with him. Sir, we have been declared dead, but here we are having tea with you. So it would have been a joke if it was not so serious, but it's a very serious issue that 33,000 people that we have chronicled who were declared dead are alive. There could be many more, but limited resources that we have, we found out 33,000. Likewise, a lot of migrants were deleted. Strangely, there are pockets where 75% women were deleted. Either they were declared dead or they were declared that they have migrated out. Men of the same household are still there, but the women have migrated out, which is impossible if you look at the cultural milieu of Bihar. It's not possible that women alone would migrate out of the state, leaving their sons, brothers, husbands, fathers, behind. So we have pointed this out. Now we went to the court, and the court kept giving us partial relief. There is no doubt about that. We were expected, as per law, as per the rules of the Election Commission, to file all the complaints that we as a party come across. So we tried to follow that rule. We took all the complaints, went to the Election Commission in Bihar. We were refused. The complaints were not taken. We were asked to send every complainant to file his or her complaint personally, bypassing the party. So be it. So we also tried to facilitate and send complainants, voters whose names were deleted, directly. Again, the Election Commission mostly refused to take those complaints. So anyway, what we've now done is we've given them almost 9 million complaints to the Election Commission. Election Commission is not acknowledging having received those complaints. They're, they're ignoring those complaints also. Yesterday, we got a good relief from the Honorable Supreme Court, wherein Aadhaar, the ID card, the identity card, has been accepted as one of the identity cards required in order for me to get my name on the electoral rolls. Yet, on the ground, whether it will be implemented seriously, we have our very, very serious doubts, because the Election Commission, all its machinery, is working as the arm of the ruling party, not working as a constitutional body, which it is, but working as the extension of the BJP, the ruling party. Anyway, we are fighting. They've targeted me personally. They've targeted my wife, who's also into politics in Telangana. They said that we have two votes. She responded that we just have one vote. We had applied for deletion. We have the acknowledgement of that application, thankfully. They forgot to delete. And in the process of accusing me of having two votes, they ended up endorsing what Rahul Gandhi has been saying, that there is a mess in the Election Commission. You do not delete votes, which you should. You delete votes, which you should not. And you end up helping the ruling party. They get a list of all these people who do not live in this particular area, and using those names, they get extra votes. So anyway, this is a long battle that we have to fight. People are getting very aware. Throughout the yatra, we saw that there was a lot of enthusiasm. People realize that their votes are being stolen. Uh, and that's something which is the only sword and the only shield a voter has in a democracy. Your vote is the only protection you have against regimes uh, which do not follow their manifestos, which harass citizens, uh, they curtail human rights, so on and so forth. So if that weapon is taken away from us, what are we left with? Today it's the vote. Tomorrow it would be the identity, the citizenship. It can go to any extent. And therefore, the fight becomes very important. It has to be nipped in the bud. We seek a lot of support from the judiciary. We seek a lot of support from civil society activists, and they are coming out in support of us. Uh, I would not say that we expect the mainstream, the legacy media to support us. They are not supporting us. Fair enough. We don't expect them to. But the the new so-called new media, YouTubers, digital space is very active. In fact, they have replaced the legacy media in raising these issues, and they're doing very well. In fact, we have a lot of gratitude for them, that the way they have exposed small examples, but they keep exposing every day. There is a new expose on this SIR exercise in Bihar. Some of them have really expose the entire exercise for what it is. And that's where lies the hope. People are taking this up on themselves to not only fix this mess in the Election Commission, also to expose the intention of Election Commission. So that's where we are. Please wish us good luck. We are fighting it. We will fight it, and we are sure we'll win.
Well, this is a
Any
tough battle.
questions?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned as well, like the election commission itself has been like uh, taking a partisan side. This is partially, right, a structural issue of how the election commission has changed from the beginning to now. Can you tell us a little bit about what has changed, particularly in 2024?
Yeah.
It
So
changed.
the appointment of the chief election commissioner, there is a panel. The panel consists of the prime minister, the leader of opposition, and the chief justice of India. That's the ideal. Now, there was an amendment to the law. The amendment was brought in by the ruling party, wherein they removed the chief justice of India. So here we are. So it's the leader of opposition and two leaders from the ruling party. That's the end of the appointment. Appointment in itself gets absolutely hijacked by the ruling party. Number one. Number two, when we demanded the CCTV footage of Maharashtra voting booths, polling stations, the election commission, after we demanded the CCTV footage, changed the rules and said we cannot share CCTV footage for after 45 days. And this they said after 6 months of the election. So they destroyed the CCTV footage. So various amendments, very summary amendments, very amendments to the rules have made sure that there is no transparency left in the polling process, in the counting process. Maharashtra, for example, it's impossible that between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m., 80,000 people have voted in an assembly. It's not just possible. 20,000 people, not possible. It's not humanly possible. So demanded the CCTV footage. They changed the rules, as I said. This is how the election commission kept undermining itself as the constitutional body and allowing itself to be completely controlled by the ruling regime.
I mean, this gets to, the partisan nature of elections in the US have always been partisan, but in India, it seems like, for so long it wasn't partisan or independent of partisan politics, right? Um, you've talked a little bit about this. I want to know a little bit more about what is not just the Indian National Congress, but other allies, regional parties, what are they doing? What are they seeing when it comes to concerns about election integrity?
There's by and large a lot of support coming from the regional parties, especially our allies. In fact, one of the allies of the ruling party, alliance, also uh, pointed out that SIR exercise should not take place when there is election around the corner. At least there should be a gap of 6 months between election and the SIR exercise. The last time the SIR took place was in 2003, and it took 1.5, 2 years. And here we have just 1.5, 2 months, that two monsoon months, rainfall, flooding. So even their ally pointed this out, but nobody heard.
And is there a plan to kind of keep pushing this forward as like a core political message? And
Yes, of course.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, that's that's a very
It is a core political message. It's a legal battle. It's a political battle. It's a battle which we are fighting on the roads, in television studios, and whenever the parliament reconvenes, also in the parliament and also in the courtroom.
yeah. And this gets to another question that I wanted to ask you is democracy isn't just at the polling booth, it is a process, right? It is a deep process that involves all of us in many ways. What are the kinds of things that you and your allies are thinking about how to engage Indians in this process in a deliberative, continuous way beyond just the polling
So
station?
in every state of India, our party and also our allies are organizing massive public meetings, public outreach to make people aware of what's happening in the electoral process of India. Yesterday, I was in Tamil Nadu. We had a massive massive public meeting there where we engaged with the people, also press conferences. So across the country, in every state, we are doing this exercise so that this issue seeps deep into people's minds that, well, this is a major issue. This is the biggest threat to our democracy that we've countered over the last several years and decades, actually.
And in other forums, you've also said that like this isn't just about your right to vote, it is about all the things that come from it, right? Like the economic rights, the right to freedom of expression. Can you talk a little bit about that as well? How
Yes.
the alliance is kind of trying to make that message clear to Indians?
Sure. So if I lose my right to vote, uh, I also lose advantage or access to the government schemes, to pensions, to ration, to free ration, to a lot of government schemes for which I will need my voter ID card, my identity card. So if I'm denied the right to vote, I'm also technically denied right to access government schemes. So I'm no longer on the beneficiary list of any schemes. Number one. Number two, then I gradually lose my citizenship also. It will not just stop at at the right to vote. It will curtail a lot of my rights, which emanate from the right to vote.
I have two more questions for you.
Sure.
I have to leave soon. So this is coming from someone in the audience, one of our board members actually, who said, like looking at youth, the role of youth across the country to many youth in the region, right, have been holding autocracies to account, most dramatically forcing heads of state to resign, this year and or just today in Nepal. But in India, we've seen youth leaders in jail for 5+ years, Umar Khalid, Sharjeel Imam, Gulfisha Fatima. So how do these attacks on youth protest leaders, how does that impact the outlook for political parties who are in opposition, like the INC and others?
Traditionally, India has had a very stable uh, tryst with democracy, and the faith in the self-correcting mechanisms, built-in mechanisms which democracies have. I think that faith is still there, and therefore you won't see many violent protests in India. We protest through the vote. But if our vote is snatched or stolen, or right to vote is taken away from us, then we are also pushing our country and our democracy into areas where we have so far avoided. Therefore, I think this struggle of ours to ensure that the election commission stays neutral is very important for people's faith in democracy. That should not get eroded. The moment it gets eroded, you see the scenes like what you saw in Nepal or in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh. Uh, so far, India has been lucky and hasn't seen these things because, as I said, there is an essential faith in our democracy. And that's what we are trying to protect.
Do you think that faith gets eroded though when you have student leaders who are in jail for 5 years without a trial, though?
Yes, you name three of them. There are several others. There are thousands of people, some of them without trial. We don't even know where, which jails. This is a major concern. This is a way to silence dissent, and dissent is what keeps democracies alive. When we were in power, between 2014, 4 and 14, there were several movements, youth movements against us. We never resorted to curbing that kind of a dissent. In fact, we engaged with them. We reached out. We had dialogues. The biggest one was the Jan Lokpal movement of Anna Hazare. Uh, I personally was a part of the negotiating team, and we negotiated with him and reached a settlement. And he lifted his protest. He withdrew his protest. We accepted his demands. So that's the way democracies function. societies will get politicized around certain issues. Governments should not be afraid of societies which are politically aware. In fact, governments should engage with them. That's the way democracies must function necessarily.
Yeah. So one last question for you, because I know you have to run soon. What is two, I'll combine two questions for you. So what is one thing that you hope that people kind of understand from the fight for democracy in India? And then how can people outside of India get involved to support, the fight for democracy?
Well, we are fighting it. We have a lot of support from within the country. As I said, civil society is really coming out in our support. There are several groups that are not only investigating what's going wrong in the SIR exercise, but also exposing very bravely. As I said, the legacy media we don't have much hope from, but the new media is the social media is coming out in our support. So far, I think we are very confident that we will be able to manage. The Supreme Court of India has come to our rescue. Every week there is an order which questions and challenges the Election Commission of India. So we are very, very grateful to the Honorable Supreme Court also. So again, as I said, the built-in corrective measures within our democracy are very strong and are live and kicking. Let's put it that way.
That's great. Sorry, our Supreme Court just came out with some terrible decisions, so it's
I
good.
know. Yes.
It's great to hear that the Indian Supreme Court is like fine. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Khera.
Thank you, Ria. I'm sorry we kept, postponing and I was unable to take your calls. I'm sorry for that. And thank you so much for your brilliant questions.
Yeah, thank you again. And now we'll turn to Mr. or Rep. Bhojani. There are a lot of common threads between what's happening in India.
I'll stay back for 5 minutes. I want to hear him.
Yeah, of course. So I'm gonna now ask you, Representative. So you joined your fellow Texas House Democrats in leaving the state to delay the passage of a new congressional map in the state of Texas. Can you tell us a little bit about what was this map? What made it so egregious, and why it disproportionately affects minority voters in Texas?
Thanks, Ria, for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity. Let me just explain a little bit how we got here, right? So after 2025 legislative session in Texas ended in June, President Trump called Governor Abbott and demanded that he create 5 new congressional districts, new seats to be redrawn to increase his majority in U.S. Congress. As you know, the Republicans are holding on to the narrowest majority since the Great Depression, only a 3-seat majority. But instead of pushing back, Governor Abbott caved into Trump's demands. And I just want to draw a quick comparison here. If you remember in January 2021, President Trump at that time had called Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and asked him for 11,780 votes to overturn the state's presidential election results. And Raffensperger, to his credit, basically said no, even though President Trump literally threatened him with criminal penalties. But he did not comply, saying that the state's certified results were accurate. But in our case in Texas, unfortunately, Governor Abbott acquiesced to Trump's demands and called a special session immediately to bring all 150 state representatives, 31 senators back to the Texas Capitol to give Trump what he wanted, 5 more seats. And that, by the way, that cost $1 million just every month to taxpayers as well. So this was not for free, and it created havoc. So let's talk about during the legislative session. The Texas legislature had 9 public hearings on redistricting, 9 of them in all different cities around the state. But 99% of the people that testified in those hearings were completely against mid-decade redistricting. Mind you, they had no maps on these redistricting hearings, right? So they didn't even say, here's what we intend to do with these maps or anything like that. So this did not allow any meaningful input by the public, But everybody that came and testified said, why do we need to do this? Like, what's the point of doing mid-decade redistricting when we just did it a few years ago? Um, so lo and behold, as soon as these 9 hearings end, literally within a day or two, these maps drop. And everybody's looking at these maps and they're saying, wow, like that's very suspicious, because in these very hearings, a lot of citizens asked, hey, are you drawing any maps? Can you show us what are you giving advice, or what instructions are you giving the drawers of the maps? And they said, no, that we don't have any maps. We're not even working on any maps. So it was really egregious from that perspective. So let's come back to your question about how we think that, these maps were egregious. So I have like 3 main comments why these are egregious. First of all, they're highly unusual, as we talked about, for doing a mid redistricting, right? Every 10 years, as you know, census is performed, data is distributed, and districts are redrawn. And not a lot of people know this, but state legislators are responsible for redrawing these congressional maps. Ideally, fair maps should be drawn, meaning that every voter and every community of interest has represented fairly in those. However, both parties are guilty of drawing maps that gain an advantage for their own party, regardless of the makeup of the district. And that's what's called gerrymandering. It's the term is thrown out a lot, but a lot of people may not know. But to avoid gerrymandering, a minority number of states, like 7 out of 50 states, have laws that have independent commission to draw nonpartisan fair maps. For example, California, Colorado, Michigan, others. But it is very rare to have state legislators take up mid-decade redistricting. So that's one of the first egregious points about these maps. Unless, I mean, obviously there's lawsuits that are filed, and then the court is ordering a legislature to redraw maps. That's different. But taking up on its own merits, it's not done. So that's number one. Number two, these are extremely, extremely gerrymandered maps. As stated, Republicans are holding on to the narrowest majority. So President Trump is concerned about, his losing in majority in Congress in the next session. So we have seen these policies are wreaking havoc. I mean, Trump's policy are wreaking havoc on Americans. Obviously, they're losing Medicaid benefits. Children and vulnerable adults are losing their food benefits, and the economy is facing uncertainty with tariffs and job losses. So people may not realize that any district can be manipulated to give an outcome that nobody can expect. So, for example, I'll take an example for Texas. Right, in 2024, President Trump won 56% of the votes, and Kamala Harris received 43% of the votes in Texas. So if you think about rough numbers, it's a 60-40 split, right? 60% Republicans and 40% Democrats. However, the new congressional maps that were drawn in such a way that in 2024 presidential election, Trump won 80% of the newly drawn congressional districts, meaning that Republicans would artificially gain 20% more power in the newly drawn districts. So this is really egregious from a partisan gerrymandering perspective. Third and last, these are intentionally racially discriminatory maps. These new maps were intentionally diluting the voting power of minority communities, in which it is a direct violation of the Voting Rights Act. The 2020 census, this is the 2021 maps that were drawn. In 2020 census, the people of color accounted for 95% of the Texas population growth, and Latinos became the state's largest demographic group. But the 2021 maps drew fewer Black and Latino voter districts that were in majority, consolidating power to white voters instead. The same trend continued in this newly drawn districts, where there's even fewer Black and Latino majority, further got diluted in that way. Lastly, I just want to quickly talk about like the packing and cracking, right? Because not a lot of people know how they are drawing these maps. So there's this concept may be thrown around. So let me just quickly give a description of that. So packing is basically concentrating a high number of minority voters in as few districts as possible to limit their influence on surrounding areas. And Harris County, area, which is nearly half of it nearly is Latino. But the newly drawn maps packed Latinos into only one Latino majority district, basically robbing them of any ability to vote their person of choice. The cracking is basically the other way around, where they're splitting minority communities across multiple districts to dilute their voting strength. I'll give you an example of DFW, the newly drawn Texas Congressional District 33, which is held by Congressman Mark VC, cracks the Black and Latino voters into 2 different districts that extend into the rural counties. So these communities cannot have any meaningful say in picking the candidate of their choice. And in these, if you even think about from the like practical perspective, these urban voters have very little in common with the rural voters that they're paired with. So it just doesn't make sense to draw these kind of districts.
I remember in Austin, you would have these maps that would get little parts of like the University of Texas and go all the way out to Houston, which is, for those who are not from Texas, a 4-hour drive from one part of the district to another. And you would have these kinds of maps, and now it's gotten even more egregious. But this is also, since you've been in the state house, this is the second time that Texas Democrats have broken quorum to delay legislation that harms people's voting rights. In 2023, there was another bill as well to limit people's voting rights, kind of similar to some of the stuff we talked about in India. But can you tell us a little bit about what happened there as well?
Yeah, so since 2020, Texas has been sort of doing more restrictions on election laws. And in 2021, as you said, Senate Bill 1 was the biggest one, which prompted a quorum break for Democrats at that time. I wasn't part of the legislature, so I wasn't part of the decision to making quorum. But I'll tell you, like these Senate Bill 1 from 2021 was really egregious. It ended pandemic era voting options. They restricted mail-in ballots in a significant way, and they created new rules for poll watchers and voter assistants. And these obviously, these measures disproportionately affected minority voters and people with disabilities. So there were four main things that happened in SB 1. The first was restricted early and absentee voting. So they banned 24 hours. So I'm sure you know, Ria, there were 24-hour voting available in Harris County, and drive-through voting. Sort of they banned all that, and as a result of Harris County doing it and getting more voter participation. And this was obviously a better idea during the pandemic as well, but it's really convenient for people who work in the daytime. They're able to work, sort of, or nighttime and vice versa. They should be able to vote that way. The number two thing that SB 1 did was it tightened mail-in voting rules. So it required voters to put their driver license or the last four of the social security number, not just on the mail-in ballot, but also the application for the mail-in ballot. And during the 2022 primary, thousands of ballots were rejected because of this technicality. And obviously, this affected disproportionately non-white voters. Number three, it increased access to poll watchers. So this law basically gave partisan poll watchers greater autonomy and access, and the judges and the people that are working at the polls cannot stop their access, even though they're trying to be more partisan. And what they did was increased criminal penalties for elected officials or election officials who interfered with them. So it's basically scared them into acquiescing with whatever demands that the partisan poll watchers would make. Number four, it criminalized voter assistance. So let's say if I went and drove in a disabled person to the polls and said, hey, I want curbside voting for this person, I would need to sign some affidavit saying that I did not take multiple people, and then it would be under penalty of perjury, and I would get criminal penalties to me as well. And it asked the person that's disabled to swear under penalty of perjury that there is no other way they could vote except from having curbside. So this actually, luckily, got struck down last year in October. So that was really good. That provision of the law got struck down. But there were other, things that happened this session actually in 2025, where they adjusted the voting schedule a bit. They moved it 3 days later and then ended the waiting period in the middle. They changed some hours as well of early voting, and then they also added restrictions to curbside voting again in response to what struck down last year, and included like 2 workers to assist curbside voters when possible, and attesting voters' physical inability as well. So I mean, these laws have really affected voting in a meaningful way for minorities and disabled persons. And this just doesn't seem fair because it just reduces more participation by voters.
And in Texas, right, voter ID laws have been around for quite some time, and they're quite restrictive, again, making it really hard for minority voters or voters who are elderly or students to be able to vote, because even if you have a student ID, for example, which needs many forms of government ID to get, you can't use it. Sometimes it's really hard on campuses, like they'll have one voting location for like a really large campus, let's say like A&M, which is almost an entire city, right? Into itself, but you have one location. You also have seen, like, as you said, these restrictions on the hours that people can vote. And then recently, maybe it was the last session where the legislature said that any county over 2 million people, their usually votes are verified at the county level and then by the Secretary of State. But for counties with more than 2 million people, which really means one county in Texas,
Yes. Yeah.
um, those votes would now be verified only by the Secretary of State, right? And again, that's taking away the votes, the voting power of Harris County, which is the most diverse county in the country.
Yeah.
Um,
There are people that were afraid of giving even water bottles to the people that are standing in line to vote, thinking that that could be criminal penalty as well under these new laws because they were trying to assist or help people that are voting. We're not. We're just. It's really hot in Texas, and sometimes people need water. There are long lines, and like even in my district has UT Arlington. There were such long lines over there. I went to sort of Paul Reed there as well, and it's just you have to completely be away from all these rules that could criminalize issues, things that you would do for any citizen so that way they can vote easily.
And what we're seeing happening in Texas isn't just like an isolated incident. So some of these fears about water bottles or giving people water, they come from laws that were introduced in, say, Georgia, where that was also criminalized. But then we're also seeing states like Missouri are doing their own special redistricting sessions as well. Can you talk a little bit both about how what's happening in Texas is being replicated in some other states, but also what, as you and your colleagues went to different states across the country, what kinds of lessons were you sharing with your colleagues? And say, I believe you were in Illinois, or in California or New York. What you guys were able to do as well to kind of counteract some of these knock-on effects that are happening, emanating from Texas.
Yeah, so we were, as these maps were offloaded, we were looking at it. We said, oh my God, this is like the most egregious maps. They're obviously in violation of the Voting Rights Act. What can we do as state representatives in the minority party? We know that we don't have the numbers, they would sort of steamroll over us easily. So we started to think about, okay, how do we sound the alarm to other states and let them know what's happening in Texas is not normal? I think the biggest thing I'm always afraid of is that people are not participating. Things happened in the legislature. It quickly happens and nobody knows about it because misinformation or lack of information is one of the biggest dangers for democracies to survive. Because if the public does not participate in the process, then we could have erosion of these voting rights even further. So we wanted to sort of go. I went to New Mexico, met Governor Lujan Grisham, and we had like two things in common that we wanted to also talk about the flooding. As you recall, earlier in July 4th, there were devastating flooding in Central Texas, where more than 130 people passed away. Most of them were kids on like Camp Mystic and others. So they had flooding in New Mexico as well. The governor immediately called a special session. There was one bill filed to provide relief for flood victims. It passed bipartisan support, and then the governor signed it, and the special session ended. And so we wanted to ask them, ask Governor Lujan Grisham, how does leadership look like for you, and how we can learn lessons in Texas from y'all, and also the redistricting effort, and this is not fair what's going on. And she was really helpful, in telling us how they took care of flooding so that we could work together sort of as Democrats. And then, we met. I didn't specifically go, but Democrats went to New York and California and Illinois and other states to sound the alarm and say what's happening in Texas is going to affect every single person. It's not just a Texas issue; it's issue for the entire country. Because if the Republicans get even more further seats artificially, I mean, again, it's okay if they win fairly and squarely. That's totally okay. But this is artificial, sort of, gerrymandering, and so that's what we wanted to sound the alarm. And to a lot of states' credit and governors' credit, they said, okay, we will counteract what Texas is doing to be more fair. But think about what Governor Newsom is doing in California, completely in opposition to what Texas is doing. Texas drew maps in complete secrecy, while the governor is saying, here are the maps, right? It counteracts 5 votes that Texas is getting, but it's first of all conditional. If Texas does it, then we will do it. And second of all, it's also conditional on the voter approval. So if the voters of California do not approve it, we're not going to do it. So even though they pass it in their legislature, it still is up for voter approval in November. So I think that's the better way of doing it and being transparent and letting people know what's going on. And I know, like you said, Missouri and other. I think while we were in Chicago in the quorum break, the Indiana legislators, some of the Democratic ones, came to us, and we had held a press conference because they were doing the same thing. Because I think Vice President J.D. Vance met their governor and said they must also do redistricting so that way Republicans can get more seats. So it was really good to be able to sound the alarm to other states and let people know. And then we had rallies. I think over 100 cities in Texas had rallies towards the middle of August for us and what Texas Democrats are doing. And so much so that now Texas Democrats has become like a really popular name for other states and saying, we are fighting against voting rights, voting suppressions, and we are Texas Democrats, right? Even though they have nothing to do with Texas Democrats, we're sort of getting a lot of publicity because of that. And I feel that's our victory for breaking quorum. I mean, Ria, we knew that we don't have the votes, right? We knew that we would lose if we did come back. But we cannot stay forever, because if we had to stay, we would have to stay until next November for these maps to not happen. And it's just staying away, I mean, without our families, without our work, and financial penalties. Not a lot of people know we are required to pay $500 a day for every day that we break quorum, plus any cost that the state incurs to get us back to our jobs. So right now, it's just a 2-week bill is $9,000. It's just, and we have to pay it personally. This cannot be a campaign contribution or anything like that. So it's a lot of, like, not just monetary penalties, but also, like, I was not able to move my son in to Rice University when he started. So there's a lot of things that we can't do because we had to do this. But I feel like we had a lot of victories. There was even a bill, I don't know if you followed, in U.S. Congress. Republicans filed a bill saying that they should end mid-decade redistricting. I don't think it had any legs, but I mean, that was another thing that we were really proud of. And there was other governors of Republican governors standing up to Trump and saying that we're not going to do mid-decade redistricting. So I think those were our victories as Texas Democrats broke quorum.
Well, that's always, it's good to hear that there's been like efforts even from Republicans to kind of counteract some of this. A question we had from the audience is, voter suppression is often framed as political corruption, or like this is something that both sides do. You got to game the system a little bit. So how do you reframe it as this is a fundamental attack on your rights, regardless of who would win, right? Like, how do we reframe it and then mobilize people around countering voter suppression?
Yeah, I think it's important for people to know that democratic institutions don't protect themselves, right? They require continuous and active participation from citizens. I think when that's lacking, then you can erode a democracy, and that happens gradually, right? It doesn't happen one event or one fine day, and now there's no more democracy. It's sort of very gradual, and I think you see all the makings of a gradual erosion of democracy. For example, if you think about the press, right? Free press is so important to any vital democracy. And that's being eroded. The Trump administration is filing lawsuits against all these press in media companies that are against him, basically. And so it's sort of a slow, gradual silencing of any opposition that comes in your way. And so I think the listeners here and people should be participating in their democracy actively and calling it when they see the erosion of democracy or voting rights, because nobody else will do that. Like, there's nobody, even the ombudsman and all the different kind of, the whistleblowers are fired. Like, the current administration has fired all those from all these agencies. So there's nobody watching over the agencies and administration to see what they're doing. And it's state by state approach is what's happening right now, right? Some states have independent voting commissions that draw fair maps, like California and others. But some states like Texas do completely gerrymandered maps. And so it's important to understand that, the example I gave, if Texas is 60-40, 60% Republican, 40% Democrats, that should be reflective of in its state legislature body, in its US Congress body. And that is not the case with these maps that are drawn. You'll have 80% Republicans there representing Texas in US Congress when that's just very artificially not accurate. So I think we all need to participate in a meaningful way. If we wanted to have a better America and better Texas for our kids, it just behooves us to get involved.
Same question that I had for Mr. Kara earlier, and I think your answer flows into this well, is like you said, democracy is a process. It's not what happens at the polling booth. What are things that people can do, Texans or not Texans, to kind of engage democracy in a regular way, beyond just going to the voting booth, voting for like whoever they think is the pro-democracy candidate, and leaving?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I've seen from a lot of community members that I've talked to is they don't really understand the levels of government in America. It's not like a lot of people come out for the presidential election every 4 years, but they don't understand the city government, how that flows in with the county government and how that flows into the state government. I think that's important to understand all the different levels of government so you can advocate effectively, like not ask, federal government questions to the city or state, right? Because that's not going to be in their purview. And then, just watch really closely. I mean, if you just go Google who represents me, and you can say who represents me, Texas, and then you will put your address in, and it'll give you every single person that represents you from the county, state, and federal government. And I think reach out to them and see what they're up to. If they're the ones that are voting for these, bad, voting suppression bills, then let them know here, because they would love every elected official that I've talked to loves to hear from their constituents, even if it's bad, because they need to know what they're voting for is not good for their district. Um, Obviously, contact their office in a regular way as well, and then help. I think volunteer to help candidates that you like, organizations that you like, especially if they're nonpartisan organizations, because that they can advance the things that you believe in. Become a poll watcher, a poll worker, election observer, like as other people say, and then register friends and neighbors to vote, because I think that's what I'm doing right now, right? Like if we've lost the redistricting battle, the maps have already been drawn, they've been signed by the governor as well, so they're in effect right now. One thing that we are doing, obviously, is also advocating it and taking it to the courts. There are civil rights organizations that are taking it to the court and making sure that these maps can be struck down. But then you can still register your friends and make sure that let people know that they need to vote out those elected officials that are voting for these bad voting suppression bills. And then attend events in local city council events or state representative events, because you'll get a lot more information. And always be respectful of people that you disagree with, right? That's really important, because there's political polarization is so bad. Like I was telling you earlier, that I was getting a lot of negative things on my social media. I was doxxed, my address was doxxed, and political violence is really real in our state and country, so we want to make sure. And then finally, I would say contribute financially to the nonprofits and other nonpartisan organizations. Obviously, Hindus for Human Rights is an obvious example, but you've got American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, Brennan Center for Justice, and fair election centers are important. If this issue is important to you, contribute financially to them, and then join their cause, because there's so much we could do. Like people say, what can one person do? I mean, there's so much that we could do. If we Democrats thought that, hey, what are we going to do? We're only 62 out of 150. We need 76 to pass or defend against legislation. We would have never scored the victories that we did, doing that. So there's a lot of power in even one person. So just exercise that as much as possible.
Well, that's thank you very much. A very in a very like not selfish, but on behalf of HFHR, very happy to hear this answer. This is wonderful. Two more questions for you. One is, so we've seen not just here in Texas, but also, as we said, in India, like identity politics being used and manipulated to split voters, silence dissent. But there is, a way in which we can kind of overcome those differences. What is the best way for all of us to kind of overcome that or band together? And how do we support politicians who are not just politicians, but also public voices who are trying to imagine a different kind of politics.
Yeah, I think right now we live in an environment where the federal administration is bullying their way into everything that they believe in, right? But that's the mandate of 50% of America, not all of America. So I think what we need to do is if when we band together and stand up to a bully, that is the best thing you can do against them, because then when you stand up against a bully, then they're like, oh wow, I'm getting a lot of dissent, and they try to put one person down, two people down, 50 people down, but they cannot do a movement that is so strong that takes, sort of fire from other people and saying, that energy continues. I think that's what we need, right? When you're seeing, the press and media being targeted, universities being targeted, right? That I've talked to a lot of university, presidents, and they've said, this is so bad, like that. How can they be targeting us? And the international students, again, hate against immigrants and international students are also one of the things that we can all band together, because I'm an immigrant from, so I feel like we all need to band together in what commonalities we have and fight for what's not right. Because when you fight against, something that is not right, I think there's a lot of momentum that you gain. Like the Texas Democrats gained a lot of momentum for fighting against these bad voter suppression maps. And we felt like there were, as we walked into these different meetings in Chicago, people were high-fiving us and really screaming good vibes to us and all that, because they knew that we were on the right side of history. So do not think that the biggest bully in the world cannot be defeated. It can be defeated. You just have to stand up and stand very firm against it. I mean, there are law firms that are being caving in right now as well, right? The federal administration is targeting law firms and universities in so many different ways. But I think if you stand up for something that you believe in so strong, that is one lesson that we all need to learn. It was very difficult for me to break quorum. I'm telling you, like, it just, there was a lot of financial issues and family issues. But I think at the end, the core was, what am I doing this for? I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for my constituents. I'm doing this because I think it's right. And this is the world I want my kids to live in. And I think that motivation led me to break quorum in a very difficult circumstance.
Well, you actually also answered my other question, which is, what is one lesson that we could all learn? And I think what you just said is, I think, a great lesson for us all. I think with that, this has been a wonderful conversation. Also, it was great to hear from Mr. Pawankara earlier about what's happening in India. And hopefully this is the start of a longer conversation between all of us here in the US, but also in India, about how do we come together to talk more about how to defend democracy and what are the lessons we can learn to defend democracy around the world. If the two largest democracies fall, we globally are in a difficult position, but I have so much trust in, as an Indian American, in both the people of India and the people of the United States. So thank you so much again.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I think I go back to what it says on our bills, right? In God we trust. So I think if all else fails, in God we trust. I think, I have hope that things will get better.
Indeed. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.